Welcome to First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast. I'm your host, James Gardner, certified athletic therapist, certified strength and conditioning specialist, yoga instructor, human being. This platform, for the pros, by the pros, anybody in the performance space, and beyond. Welcome here to share in the stories of professionals, experiences, journeys, learning along the way. It's a platform to connect, to network, and to be a part of a community that cares, with conversations that matter, experiences that resonate, and generate ideas, thought-provoking, organic dialogue, passionate pros. Brought to you as always by First Star Therapy, Mobility Tape, Epic, and Benchmark Athletics. In association with the Canadian Athletic Therapists Association. It's First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast. Thanks for being here. Thank you for being a part of it. We are finally back and with another amazing guest. Dr. Amy Saltzman is with us this evening on Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast. Of course, now the official podcast of WFAT, the World Federation of Athletic Training and Therapy. Dr. Saltzman, welcome back again on a different level this time. I'll introduce your newest project, more groundbreaking work from you in your field of expertise. And relatable to all of us in the sports field, to all of us in humanity, to be quite honest. An opportunity to get educated and learn from an expert in the field of significance in the sports world. Research indicates children are most vulnerable to sexual abuse between the ages of 7 and 13. Unfortunately, engaging age-appropriate educational materials that teach children to recognize and prevent abuse are almost non-existent until now. Spot a Spider is a groundbreaking new training program started by Dr. Amy Saltzman, MD, that teaches children, teens, and young adults how to protect themselves from all types of abuse: sneaky, covert emotional abuse, also known as grooming, and obvious, overt, emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. Dr. Saltzman is a physician, mindfulness coach, author, former Stanford gymnast, and Sir Thriver of decades of sneaky emotional abuse. She is passionate about creating protective prevention programs and establishing comprehensive local, national, and international policies to end abuse in sports and other community programs. The Spot a Spider Advisory Board includes high-profile Judge Rosemarie Aquilina, the judge in the trial of U.S. gymnastics doctor and convicted abuser Larry Nassar. Amy, welcome. Dr. Saltzman, nice to see you again. It's been a while, and you have obviously been busy with this project. Congratulations on rounding this into form. I know it's been a passion project, something that hits close to home for you on a number of levels. And more importantly, I think, not more importantly, but equally as importantly, something that can be brought to light for all of us to learn about, learn from, and grow to be a part of spotting and stopping abuse in sport, not only at the amateur level, but all the way through. So thank you for being here. I'll let you say hello, and then we'll jump into where this all started and where it's headed.
Yeah, it's really nice to be here with you and to be back chatting about this particular project and to this particular audience who I think are in a unique position to spot and stop abusive spiders.
Absolutely. And I think that's probably where our audience wants to spend some time. I would like to start with a little bit more of a historical background on when this started for you in terms of your interest, in terms of how this turned into having an advisory board, and now where this is rolling and where you hope to see this play out in terms of an educational piece, a shift in culture, obviously sports stories across the globe here in Canada, Hockey Canada, with an obvious cultural shift needing to happen, the gymnastics in the US, and you know, on and on and on. So where do you see this as it currently stands? I guess is a good place to start, and where do you see it taking footing?
So I think I'm going to back up one step because I think you asked how did this start. So we'll do
Sure.
that and then we'll move forward. And if I miss a question, you can remind me.
Absolutely.
But really, this started. I had a 31-year long relationship with a life coach. And in January of 2020, I asked to complete the relationship, at which point her gaslighting of me intensified. And she was telling me I had early Alzheimer's or I was resisting my spiritual growth. And she actually insisted that I get a neuropsychological workup. So I had a full assessment that was 7 hours of testing for me, 2 hours of the neuropsychologist talking to the coach, and 1 hour of the neuropsychologist talking to my husband. And at the end of that discussion, the diagnosis was that my relationship with her was a relationship of undue influence, which is also covert emotional abuse or coercive control. So that in and of itself was devastating to learn that I had essentially been being groomed and abused by someone I had loved and trusted for 31 years. And for a while, it actually shattered my world. You were with me through part of that. And then in part of my healing, I really started to think about like, wow, that's 31 years of grooming. Like, and I have expertise now in what it's like psychologically to be groomed. And one of my gifts always has been taking really difficult topics and explaining them to children. So that's how I came to teach mindfulness to kids and to young athletes. And so I think partly for my own healing and partly to make, as I told you when we were chatting before, to make lemonade and lemon meringue pie out of some pretty bitter lemons, I decided that I was going to take this experience and use it to educate people, and especially young people, about how to spot covert emotional abuse. Because, and I want to make a distinction here, covert emotional abuse can be kind of considered synonymous with grooming, but I think the problem is when we think about grooming as kind of just grooming, we miss the fact that even if there's no physical or sexual abuse, the grooming in and of itself is abusive. And in fact, there's data to show that covert emotional abuse, victims of covert emotional abuse are more likely to have dissociative symptoms and more likely to have PTSD than victims of physical or sexual abuse. And I think the reason for that is because the abuse is so sneaky. So the whole point of this is to make grooming and covert emotional abuse, make the patterns of grooming and covert emotional abuse easy to see so that kids can tell a trusted adult, just even something feels off here. And then the kids and the adults can have a conversation about what is it that feels off. And okay, do you remember that video that we watched about sneaky spiders? Do you see any threads of a spider's web? Do you see any of the patterns of the spider's web? How many of the patterns do you see? And that can help people determine, is this behavior of this coach, of this teacher, of this music teacher, of this religious leader, okay, or is it abuse?
Right. And you speak to those patterns, and I think maybe this is a good jumping off point just to identify those four primary patterns that you highlight in terms of this sort of covert emotional abuse. Probably better for you to discuss them than me to just name them. When we're identifying these, what are those four primary patterns, and how do we identify those?
Right. So covert emotional abuse is very sneaky. So usually the first thing that happens is that we're going to use coach and athlete for this conversation, but it really could be any of the pairs that I mentioned before. The coach will make the athlete feel special. And that can involve love bombing. And love bombing sounds like this big thing, but it can be something simple like saying, oh, you're one of the best athletes I've ever coached, or I'm going to offer you a little extra time, or I'm going to offer you a ride home. Or like in the Nassar case, one of the things he did was offer the gymnasts food because their diets were super restricted. And so as long as an athlete's being obedient and compliant, that love bombing and sense of specialness can go on for a very long time. Mm-hmm. If an athlete starts to push back and say like, this feels a little weird, this feels a little creepy, I'm not completely comfortable, usually what the sneaky spider will do at that point is become even more charming and say, oh, you don't have to worry, you can trust me, this is what all great coaches do with their best athletes, really everything's fine. If the athlete still is listening to what I call their wise self, that inner radar that says, this doesn't seem right, then often the coach will start bullying the athlete, playing on the athlete's dreams and their fears. So it's like, well, without me, you'd be nobody. And without me, you'll never fulfill your dreams. And maybe you just don't have what it takes. And so they're instilling self-doubt, and the athlete trusts the coach and kind of starts to doubt themselves. And it just gets more intensified. Then the next pattern is separating the athlete from people who might be also questioning what's going on. So if I'm an athlete and I have questions, and you're an athlete and you have questions, the coach will tell me, oh, don't talk to James. James is in a bad headspace and you don't want to kind of get pulled down by James. So don't chat with James, because he doesn't want you and me comparing notes, because then we might go, oh, well, I saw this thread. And you'll say, I saw this thread. And then it's like, oh, we see the web. So he doesn't want us talking to each other.
Right.
He doesn't want the athlete listening to their parents if the parents are raising concerns. So he might say, well, and I'm going to switch genders. I'll say she might say, because I want to make clear abusive spiders come in all genders, shapes, and sizes. So the coach might say, oh, well, your parents don't know what it takes to get to the next level. And they don't understand that I'm just doing this to make you your best. And so then now as an athlete, you're doubting your parents. And then if there's an assistant coach, or thank you, athletic trainers, an athletic trainer who says, this coach is making me nervous. The coach may say, oh, well, the athletic trainer doesn't know what he's talking about. Or worse, the coach may fire the trainer, like someone who's making noise. And then I think the greatest abuse of separation is that the coach separates the athlete from their wise self. The coach separates the athlete from the part of themselves that says, this doesn't feel right, something's off, he's being too friendly, or this isn't coaching, this is more than coaching. And so the athlete again doubts themselves and trusts the coach, and the cycle just kind of keeps spinning. The other thing is that the coach will kind of alternate bragging and being like excessively humble. So one day they'll be like, oh, I'm the greatest coach and I'm going to get you to where you want to go. And then the next day they'll say, oh, well, I would never say I'm great. But your friend told 5 friends that I'm great. And now those 5 friends want to train with me. So really, like, you should appreciate my greatness. And then there's the standard kind of lying and denying. I didn't say that. I didn't do that. You misinterpreted. You misunderstood. You're not remembering correctly. And then one of the other greatest abuses is having an athlete lie to themselves or lie to other people. And I won't go into the whole story right now, but in the Sneaky Spider video, there's a very egregious example of a US gymnastics coach doing that with athlete. What I'll say about the lying is that usually, just like with touch, which we may come to in a minute, but with the lying, usually they'll start with something very small. So they'll say something like, oh, James, you didn't finish your reps, or James, you're having a really bad attitude today. And, as an athlete, we just want to do our sport that we love. And so you might just say, instead of saying, no, actually, I did all my reps, you might say, oh, I'm sorry, I'll finish my reps. Or, oh, I'm sorry, I'll change my attitude, just because you want to do your sport and you want the coach off your case. And so all of those patterns are explained in more detail and in more kid-friendly language in the Sneaky Spider video, but those are the kinds of behaviors you want to look for.
Okay, perfect. And just to take that a little bit further in terms of accessing the video, it's for children, but obviously informative to parents, to athletic trainers, to other people who are either ignorant to it, haven't spent any time with it, and can also sort of grow through watching and connecting with this information. Easiest place to find that, best way to connect with that would be through where?
So the website's www.spotaspider.com. There are 2 videos. We've talked about the first one, which is spotting the sneaky, covert emotional abuse, which often precedes the other abuse. And then the second video is how to spot an obvious spider, that talks about obvious emotional abuse, obvious physical abuse, and obvious sexual abuse. And again, the reason I made this is that people don't really have language or understanding to discuss this. And for a lot of people, the idea of talking about this is super intimidating.
Sure.
And they don't know where to start. And so my intention was to make it as easy and as clear and as simple and as accessible as possible. There's discussion question guides, there's pictures. Parents can choose between, or a coach showing it in a public setting, or an athletic trainer showing it in a public setting, can choose between using a nude, anatomically correct pictures or G-rated bathing suit pictures. But one of the things we know for sure is that people who are empowered to use proper anatomical terms for their sexual body parts are way less likely to be abused than those who don't feel comfortable using those words. And I start with the words of mouth and hands. And if you can say mouth and hands, then you can say breasts and butt and penis and vagina and anus. And when you can say that, then you can ask someone not to touch those spots, or tell someone that someone has touched those areas.
A great learning point for those of us with children, for those of us that work in amateur space. And to be quite honest, one of the first things that we learned as parents was to ensure that anatomy is anatomy. That's how we name it. That's what we're going to call it. We're not going to utilize nicknames for that. And if those nicknames start to be used in and around our discussions, then we know it's coming from potentially somewhere else, and it's a little bit of an amber alert on our side for something to potentially follow up on. I just want to take a step back. Obviously, the educational tools and having access to the videos and and beginning the dialogue in difficult dialogue scenarios, or difficult conversations are always difficult to have, but they do resolve a lot of things, as we know. Reporting something like this, as an athletic trainer, as an athletic therapist, generally I'm not at the top of the food chain. I have a general manager, or I have a head of sports medicine, or somebody that I can go to and begin to have some dialogue about some of my worries or concerns in a scenario like this. Children who have parents or caregivers at home have potentially somebody, but if there's not sort of that structure, what is the next step in escalation if we're worried about a coach, or we're worried about somebody in power, a colleague, a friend, somebody like yourself, a medical doctor? Like, where should the general public, and then in the sports space, what would you advise in terms of escalating to the next step, or beginning potentially to monitor this a little closely, these scenarios?
Okay, so I'm going to take that question in two pieces. We're going to talk about the way the world is now, and we're going to talk about how the world would ideally be. So the way the world is now, whether you're an athlete or an athletic trainer or assistant coach, you're going to need to make your best choice about who to report to. And unfortunately, the way the world is now, that has some risk, regardless of your position. The way the world should be is that every team, every club, every sports organization, from the littlest of the littles to the pros, should have a very simple, anonymous reporting form that someone can go on and list again, I'm going to use coach in this situation, but the coach, the team, the date, any specifics they have of the incident. And then ideally that concern would be reviewed by an athlete safety committee that would be comprised of, depending on the age, either two parents or two athletes, and hopefully, a coach, a director, and a trauma-informed professional. And in most communities where you have large sports organizations, it's not going to be hard to find a parent who's a trauma-informed psychologist or a psychiatrist or a physician to sit and serve on that committee. And hopefully, if you're putting other systems in place, that committee is not going to be very busy. But ideally we would have systems. But one of the questions, for example, in the discussion questions for the videos is, if you have concerns, please consider, as an athlete, who are 3 people in your life that you could tell. So it could be the assistant coach, it could be the athletic trainer, it could be your teacher at school, it could be the school nurse, it could be your parent. And if the first person, and this goes for children or adults who are reporting concerns, if the first person doesn't take you seriously, then you tell the next person, and you keep telling people until you get support.
Beautiful. And I think, from, again, to biases towards the practitioner side of things, the involved practitioner, the athletic therapist, the athletic trainer, we are well versed in making EAPs and being aware of emergency action plans when it comes to physical injuries. This is another stream or another strain of an EAP, in my opinion, in your opinion, in our opinion, that can potentially fall into the lap of creating something like this if it's not in place, or at least identifying some spokes and some folks in the area that can be a part of this, or are willing to be a part of this, so that we can be a little bit more progressive, as opposed to being reactive to finding out what's going on, as we start to see these stories trickle out and come to the surface in 2022. It's too little too late, and it's identifying things that could have or should have been in place potentially beforehand. So this is very important, and I think potentially
Right. And if you go to the website under the resources page, there's also a resource for policies and procedures. And it's really everything from, as a team or a club, what do you need to set up, all the way to honestly what I think the IOC should be doing. You and I were talking before we started recording also about even the role of the media. Like if you're not getting response through your sports organization, go to your local newspaper, go to the police. Again, ideally, as caring, proactive sports involved people, we would be setting up systems that work. But between where we are now and when those systems are fully in place, we need to utilize every opportunity that we can.
Absolutely. And again, I think we're not going to solve the issue in this podcast, but we're at least going to highlight that there's a lot of work that can be done, and there are some pretty simplistic steps that you've laid out that can be very effective immediately in organizations or clubs that don't have something in place, or even that do, that could use some tweaking.
Well, and the thing is, I understand, right? Coaches are busy, club directors are busy, and in the same way that I've tried to make it as easy as possible for parents to have these discussions with their children at home, I've also tried to make it equally easy for clubs. Like, here's what you need to do, here's how you do it. For example, one of the other resources is an anonymous athlete survey. You can survey your athletes at least once a year, see if there are any patterns with any coaches in your organization. The forms online, it's free to use. I hope people use it, and it lets you spot people early.
Absolutely. And in spotting things, three major questions that you pose sort of as a preamble to this, and giving information to this community and beyond. How do we see it, which we've identified to some degree in terms of patterns and behaviors, and there's a whole lot more through the websites and a lot of the programming that you'll be offering as well for organizations and clubs that are interested in pursuing this and being groundbreaking in terms of providing this for athletic trainers, coaches, personnel, developing committees, all of these pieces. How do we see it? How do we stop it? And how do we heal it? And these are three very important questions. We've touched a little bit on how do we see it? How do we stop it? It's finding ways and finding channels to report it and be taken seriously in doing so. If there's anything you want to take out of those three questions or jump into how do we heal it, where does this, how do we tie this, how do we summarize this sort of fairly briefly in those three questions?
Yeah, so I think I'll hit on each of them. So the spotting is really, that's what the videos are for. And it really goes through all four types of abuse: covert emotional abuse, obvious emotional abuse, which for some reason in sports, we still let coaches or people get away with behavior that we would never accept from a school teacher or a piano teacher or a chess teacher. And then obvious physical abuse, and maybe some types of physical abuse that aren't so obvious. And again, this falls into your domain, but like if a coach is insisting that an athlete override an athletic trainer or therapist or physician's recommendations, that's actually physical abuse. If a coach is suggesting that an athlete be, what I use for the kids is like so skinny that they're not healthy, that's physical abuse. And then in terms of stopping, we did talk about like the reporting, but there's also hiring questions that can help you screen out so that you don't hire a spider in the first place. And then there's kind of accountability procedures that if you determine that abuse has happened, any type of abuse has happened, how are you going to deal with it? And are you going to enforce consequences for the person who's being abusive, but also for anyone who failed to report the abuse. And then in terms of healing, I think it is healing for people to talk about it. I hope that really this program is moving more so that we're preventing things so that they don't need to be healed. But if we get to the point where they need to be healed, you know, people need a safe space to be heard, to process their feelings, to tell their stories. And usually that's going to be a trauma-informed therapist who understands abuse. And ideally, it would be not only a trauma-informed therapist, but someone who also understands the world of sport. And that's a fairly narrow overlap right now. Hopefully, we'll have more people trained in both. And then I also think it's healing if the people who have been abusive or enabled abuse are held accountable. So all of those steps are involved in the healing process. And because it is one of my favorite analogies, and you have the audience that you have, the healing work to recover from covert emotional abuse or physical or sexual abuse is really not that different than the work of recovering from an ACL tear, which is a visible injury where, you know, we see people in the weight room and doing their exercises and grimacing through their ranges of motion, and the emotional work of healing is very similar, and we need to respect it in the same way. And then the other analogy that I use is concussions, which, you know, the injury of concussions was not so recognized until just recently. And that's really, in some ways, it's an invisible injury, but the damage is real. And I would say that that's the same for abuse.
Right. And highlighted so well. And I think we as therapists, we as practitioners, we see a lot of this in our athletes. We see when emotions change. We see in an academic setting or a university or collegiate or high school setting where, you know, stress from home or stress from academics or stress from the social or emotional components of life starts to interrupt things. And there's an opportunity to begin healing, to help with a process, to ask questions that are geared towards things that we may not be able to see, like an ACL tear or something physical.
Right. And you all are in such a unique position because you do have that direct contact with the athletes, but you also often are eyes and ears in the training and competition environment that sometimes I think as a plus, not out of respect for your profession, but in terms of spotting spiders, people kind of can forget you're there, but you can see and hear at things that might go unseen and unheard. And so it's a really powerful vantage point that you have to just like, even just listening, like, oh, that tone of voice, or, you know, like she said no, and the coach is saying, you still need to do X, Y, or Z. You know, those little things often are the tip of the iceberg. And then they kind of hint at what happens when no one else is in the room.
Yeah, and I think that borders on a lot of the operational pieces of being a practitioner in the sports field, in the amateur sports field or professional sports field. We have a duty of care to the athlete and their well-being. This is our top priority. There's a secondary priority that needs to be a secondary priority, and that is the duty to the organization or club that you are a part of. But first and foremost is the health and well-being of those you are working with and serving. And so I think, Amy, as we talk further to this and I listen a little bit more, and we hopefully encouraging people to go and watch these videos, this has legs to be educational in programs like athletic therapy training, athletic trainers as they're going through school, and this running right alongside with how to identify an ACL tear, how to identify signs and symptoms of a concussion. I just see so much leverage here and so much potential here, even in just connecting with athletes, with other human beings. Just take the jersey out, take the number, take the competition out of the equation. Training like this allows us to be a little bit more empathetic, to listen a little differently, to see things a little bit differently, more in tune with, um, you know, best practices, best, duty of care to those that we serve and those that we work with. And so I don't want to cut this off. I think we can talk about this at nauseum, and nauseum being good in this case. I would encourage any listeners out there, students out there, parents out there, children out there, anybody listening to this, to check out those resources, make something of it, reach out to myself. I'm directly connected to Dr. Saltzman. She's also very well connected, and you can reach her, and she does a great job of responding no matter how many hundreds or thousands of requests she gets. But I think this is critical. I think this is something that for me, even just in having this conversation tonight and familiarizing myself with it and utilizing this community to get the word out about what this is, and what we can do to be a part of a solution, as opposed to waiting till it's too late. And I think education is a big thing for me. Education is a big thing for athletes, but for the service industry that we're a part of, we are privy to all of the things you touched on, meetings, private sessions, private coach sessions, one-on-ones, open field, embarrassment of certain players in front of everybody else. These things happen, and these things continue to happen because most of us don't want to have the conversation, or we don't know how to have the conversation, perhaps, or we just think this is just part of sport. And so I think identifying a lot of these things as you have, and as we begin to, has a lot of leverage in our space as we talk to, again, the practitioners in the room and the coaches that are picking this up and listening, and the organizations that I'm a part of will certainly have this surface as something that could be potentially very impactful in servicing humanity, the human side of sport.
And I just wanted to add one piece that we didn't touch on, but part of my intention isn't just prevention and protection, but I also want to give back. So if a club decides that they want to use this, for each club can get a promotion code, and 20% of every video purchase will go back to the club. So you can protect your athletes, you can protect your organization from liability, and you can raise money. It beats a bake sale or a car wash. So there's that piece as well.
And I think as you talk to that, like, I just keep seeing lights go off in my head about this being utilized as continuing education for practitioners. On an annual basis, we are required to meet X number of hours of continuing education. This, for me, is something that needs to be brought to the forefront of our organizational bodies. The CATA here in Canada, potentially the NATA in the US, WFAT across the board, where we have athletic therapists that are great at taping ankles and rehab and strength and conditioning. This side of things hasn't been explored, to my understanding, to as high a level or as high a degree, and it deserves its place in our education process. And so I would encourage those out there listening to push for this to be a part of your education, part of our education, in terms of getting credit for this as part of your professional development in this space. And so I'll have some more of those conversations as we move forward with you, Amy, as well as with some of those people that I have the opportunity to speak with. This is an amazing program. You have an amazing advisory board. You've poured heart, soul, and more into this project. And I don't need to wish you the best with this. This is going to take it's going to take for those that listen, and it's going to take for those who want to be groundbreaking and at the forefront of involving this in the education of everybody involved. Where do you want this to go in terms of this evening's chat, or just in general the program? How do you see this making a difference? How do you see this changing the way things currently stand in the world of sport?
Well, I love your idea of having it incorporated into like all the various trainings and credentialings. I think that's brilliant. And really, I want it in everyone's living room as a dinner table conversation like you described. And, I want it to go to the IOC. I want the IOC to say, we want all of our organizations and federations and to agree to these principles or something similar. I want international databases that are up to date and maintained and detailed, and not, oh, well, the coach left for personal reasons, or or we had a parting of the ways. Like, I hope that those days are over.
Brilliant. And I hope so as well. And as we continue to have more information and have more of these stories surface, we can be the change with programs such as Spot a Spider. It's Dr. Amy Saltzman. She has put this program together. It is groundbreaking. It is novel. It is something that we all need, whatever level of sport you're in. And I obviously started this with the vulnerability of children, but adults were children once as well, and this becomes
well, and we have way too many recent stories of adults. I mean, you look at your or our adult women soccer players. You look at Kyle Beach. You look at the University of Michigan football players. I mean, if you were to vote like who's the least likely to get abused, you would probably think it is a male American football player. And it's just not the case. And that's, so spiders come in all shapes and sizes, and victims come in all shapes and sizes. And so it really does need to be from the youth level to the professional level.
Sometimes it's sneaky, sometimes it's quite obvious, sometimes it is overt, sometimes it is covert, but it's there, and we need to make sure that we identify it. We need to make sure that we begin to stop it, and certainly continue to heal it. Dr. Saltzman, I really appreciate it. Amy Saltzman, MD, making progress as we move towards changing the world of all of this. And I really thank you sincerely for being on here, for your time this evening, and for the creation of something that is in fact game-changing and hopefully takes with our audience and beyond. Spread the word. It's called Spot a Spider. Check it out. Reach out to Dr. Saltzman, reach out to myself, and hopefully in the near future this will be on the agenda for professional development across the board, no matter your scope of practice. I'll leave you to say goodnight. Again, I truly appreciate seeing you, having you on, chatting with you, and all of the work that you continue to do. It's an honor to be a colleague, a friend, and to be able to present this information to others.
Thanks so much, James. And the feeling is definitely mutual. So thanks for spreading the word and all you do for the health and well-being of athletes and athletic staff.
Much appreciated. This is Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast, the official podcast of WFAT. Reach out. You can get us on Instagram at letschat.at. We look forward to checking in. We look forward to hearing from everybody. Join the conversation. Join the community. Thanks for being here, and good night.
Thanks again for being here. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being a part of this community. Check us out online, firststartherapy.com. That's FIRSTAR therapy.com. Or email us with feedback, consult@firststartherapy.com. CONSULT@firststartherapy.com. On Instagram @firststar.therapy, and our podcast host @letschat.at. This is First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast.